We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The president represented the United States at COP26, the uber elite climate conference hosted in Scotland this week, and it hasn't gone too well. From falling asleep on camera to vague commitments to spending all of your hard-earned dollars, one wonders just what impact this globalist charade will have on real working folks. Well, to help us crunch those costs, we're joined once again by author and economist, Mr. Andrew Moran. Welcome back to the show, Andrew.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, was this conference, was it a genuine effort to solve a problem? Or was it all just theatrics to justify increased taxation and big state regulation?
Well, I think everything, all these global summits are nothing but theatrics, whether it's the UN General Assembly or the COP26 or the Paris Accord, it's all just theatrics. I think two of the best signs to support my supposition that it was all nonsense was first, the way the media leaders described it. They described this whole event as the last chance to stop the climate emergency. If we don't spend all this money, then the world's going to end. And then the second sign was when President Biden, he fell asleep. I think that was a good sign too. But I can't fault the guy. I can't fault the guy for falling asleep. I would have fallen asleep too. If you read any of the transcripts of any of these officials who spoke, and I couldn't watch it because my eyes would be stuck in the back of my head because from rolling it all the time. But if you read the transcript, it was all the same poppycock. It was transformative action, climate crisis, only spending can reverse climate change. So yeah, it's all theatrics, and it's the same song and dance they tap to every single time on their private jets, spending millions of dollars. You know, I think it was the UK that had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to host this event, and of
course they'll make that back through taxing British citizens, which is, of course, the noble way to do it.
But if I wait one thing though, it was funny because they're saying how smaller countries can't host these events anymore because of how expensive they've become. So what the heck is that?
Yeah, Joe Biden riding an 85-car motorcade around Rome and then hopping on a private jet to attend a climate conference. The message is below the surface on this. Now, these commitments that the leaders of, I guess, 120 odd nations that they're making on behalf of their people, is it really just a case of taking money from poor people in rich countries and giving it to rich people in poor countries? Because to me, that's really what it seems like.
Well, I think that happens both on the domestic front and the international front. So if you have this, let's say the Build Back Better agenda, I think $600 billion of that, which is probably going to be $12 trillion of that, of the climate change component, that's a wealth transfer from the poor and middle class to the well-connected to the wealthy, because you're just taxing those people, whether it's subsidies and you're giving it to, you know, these cronyists. And then on the international level, yeah, you're absolutely correct. Many of these impoverished countries, they're poor for a reason. They have all these corrupt governments. They have the private sector that's cozy with these other corrupt officials, and then the policies they enact achieve absolutely nothing. So they say that all this money that they're giving to these poor countries, say that strings are attached to these funds. But once again, that's poppycock. Other nations, you know, what other nation is going to say, let's say Ethiopia, they're going to say, oh, you know, you have to pay this money back because you haven't achieved any of the climate change targets. That is not going to happen at all.
Yeah, this COP26 is being billed as the most significant environmental conference since the 2015 Paris Accords. Now, the Fourth Estate gives much kudos to the Paris Accords, but to my understanding, it's, as you just pointed out here, it's all a bit of a sham, isn't it? I mean, the Accords only mean that countries have to provide a goal for where they want to be in the future and report their progress towards it. And that's about it. That's all they have to do to be widely lauded by the world's international press. There's no teeth to it. There's no repercussions, as you just pointed out. And as we've seen with China, there's no fallout whatsoever if you decide you were too optimistic and then you're shifting back to coal-fired power stations for the next 10 years just to make sure. Now, is COP26, that's just more of the same, right?
Yeah, it is too. And if you look at the data, let's say you look at the U.S. Emissions data from when they left the Paris Accord. U.S. is one of the few, perhaps even the only developed country to see a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions compared to all the other signatories of the Paris Accord. But in the end, I mean, as long as you tell all these developed countries what they want to hear, your little poor old country is going to get its hands on this nice chunk of change. And these countries admit it too. If you read or watch the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi,
Modi.
he was saying that too. He was saying, okay, fine, we depend on coal right now. We have to produce coal because our country's running out of power. We need our people to survive. But if you want us to go adopt this green economy, then you have to give us money. You have to give us all this cash so we can mitigate this climate crisis. And of course, India's energy sector is quasi-state run. A lot of its companies are owned directly by the government. Others are, chiefly regulated by the government, so it's quasi. And these executives, these bureaucrats, these politicians, they're going to divvy up these payments and start counting their rupees. But at the same time, India wants its cake and eat it too. On the one hand, they'll say they want the money. And on the other, they say, okay, fine, we'll become net zero, but we're going to do it in the year 2070. And of course, Modi's not going to be around in the next 50 years. So these are just empty promises. Nobody's going to be held accountable whatsoever for this nonsense.
Well, let's dig into these numbers a little bit, Andrew. How much is this grand parade going to cost the average American taxpayer?
Yeah, well, so the Build Back Better agenda, that of course, is $600 billion. So you divvy that up, that's gonna be.
Hang on, hold the horse there, Andrew.
Yeah,
I
sure.
thought it was zero cost.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at that regard, if you want to dive deeper into the monetary aspect of it, that's going to create massive waves of inflation. So that's going to directly cost U.S. taxpayers. When it comes to this whole COP26, I think the price tag is $100 billion to give to these poor countries. U.S. is throwing in about $20 billion of that. So once again, the U.S. taxpayers are going to be responsible for that. But I think it's not so much of a financial cost more than it is a societal issue, because if the real problem right now with going green and adopting all these green technologies, look what happened in Texas. 20% of its power grid was based on renewables. You look at what's happening in England. England has 45% of its power from renewables, but they had the least windy summer in the last 60 years. So that was another issue. So many countries in Asia.
Fortunately, Britain has Russia not too far away to rely on to send gas and fuel.
Yeah, hold on. But no, my last point though, and all these other countries, in Asia and Europe, they're suffering through these rolling power outages, and you see the correlation that they've invested heavily in the green renewables and green energy technology. So they're going to need more oil and gas, and everyone is finally starting to realize that. Okay, fine. Oil and gas, it's going to be here. These carbon zero goals are not realistic. I think it was the IEA who said, yeah, by the year 2050, oil and gas still can account for about a third of all energy output. So this whole, this fairies and lollipops is just not achievable at all. It's just these people want to go on there and, have sunshine and lollipops and spend millions of dollars doing it.
Yeah, now we hear a lot about these emissions, climate issues. We hear about world hunger and any number of other catastrophes that are awaiting the human race. And so far, the solution from world leaders has always been more government, more taxes, and more spending. Now, tell me, Andrew, I'm reasonably sure I know your answer to this, but are they better left to the free markets to solve?
But you forgot one thing. You forgot about the printing. That's another mechanism.
Yes, the free money.
I think the free market does a much better job than the government ever could on whether it's the environment or fighting global warming, whatever the case. You see a lot of innovation going on in the private sector, a lot of free enterprise developing these great technologies, whether it's, carbon vacuuming. A lot of Wall Street investment funds are investing in companies that are doing this. You're having a lot of, entrepreneurs developing technologies to help get rid of plastic in the oceans. So what the government does is that they have all this waste, they have all this malinvestment, they misdirect the resources where it could be achieved more. There's a great environmentalist, he's a more of a realistic environmentalist. His name's Lundberg, he's Danish, and he was talking about, instead of having these vast conferences, instead of putting all this money into these cronyist green companies, you're better off just putting all this money into research and development, as opposed to padding these fat salaries in these green companies. I wrote a couple of years ago talking about this massive bubble that's occurred in the ESG realm, and I also wrote about it. I did a Swamponomics TV video about it, and the problem with that is that, yeah, sure, the Wall Street and the private sector, they're getting involved in climate change. The issue is that the government has distorted it so much, whereby And anything that's labeled green will obviously get all these subsidies. So Wall Street's new mantra is, fossil fuel is bad, green is good. But at the same time, they're abandoning any sort of semblance of due diligence and necessary research to, find the right company, find the right technology, because they just want to find, you're green, you get $1 billion. You're green, you get $1 million without doing anything. So that's going to hurt any sort of, climate change efforts or these companies that want to solve the issue.
As Oliver Stone's Gordon Gekko might have said, green is good. Andrew Moran, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Right after this short break, we're talking liberty with Scott Cosenza. Is a simple plastic bag enough of a reason to violate your privacy? We'll be right back with Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Who are we? We are Americans that believe in liberty. We are a project of the nonprofit One Generation Away. We are patriots who apply the founding principles to the issues of today.
And they keep moving the goalposts on us.
We are educators and commentators who love America and the Constitution. Who are we? We are Liberty Nation.